Hello everyone, welcome to our live stream event here on July 27th, 2020. We are tonight in partnership with the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts and the Tri-Centric Foundation, who have put together and assembled a panel of artists who are going to be able to speak to the life and creativity of the music of Anthony Braxton and how it influences their own practice. I won't spend too much time talking now because we also have joining us Steve Smythe, who's going to be moderating the event tonight and speaking with the artists as they assemble into a panel discussion later in the evening. But up first, we thought we would give an excerpt of a recent performance of Anthony Braxton's music, a large-scale opera called Trillium J, which was written in 2009 and performed at the Roulette Intermedium space in Brooklyn, New York. It features some of the artists that you'll hear from tonight and was co-produced by the Tri-Centric Foundation, who we're very grateful for, especially Kyoto Kitamura, who helped us to put this event together, and James Fay, who has been an incredible collaborator in helping the International Contemporary Ensemble to get to know the music of Anthony Braxton. So thank you to both of them. Thank you to Evan Leslie and the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts at Lincoln Center. And thank you to you all for joining. Later on, we'll have some instructions for how you can join us in a Zoom Q&A that follows this YouTube broadcast. If along the way you have questions, feel free to add them to the chat window of the YouTube browser so that we can bring those questions into the Zoom conference after this and get to know each other and have a little conversation about the music of Anthony Braxton with these amazing artists. Thank you again for joining, and up next, a 4-minute excerpt from the multi-day opera written by Anthony Braxton called Trillium J from 2009.
Here's a Midwest-bound special. Notify the Cedar Rapids crowd.
There goes a westbound junket.
Look at the eastbound vessels.
What about the tourist ships with offshore gambling provisions? People, when our group is finished, the Mississippi River will bypass St. Louis and end up in southern Illinois just in time for the riots.
Regional colleagues, hear my words and let the movement go forth. Our strategy is offered with total solidarity and with the concern of all our citizens as the highest priority. What we have here is a spiritual commitment that contains unspiritual subcomponents. The concept of the modern era is a convenient way to deal with issues that in the end are fundamental. The fact of life and death, or at least their deaths.
It's really just hard for me to state how much joy it gives me to see even such a brief excerpt of a performance of Anthony Braxton's music, and one of his grandest statements, one of his operas at that. My name is Steve Smythe, and I've been writing about music for a little over 20 years, but I've been listening to Anthony Braxton's music for something closer to about 35 years. I guess I'm dating myself a little bit, but I have to just really acknowledge the fact that this man and his music have been a part of my life for such an extremely long time. And the music itself fascinated me from the very start. The mix of rigorous methodology and a kind of overtone of mysticism expressed in abstract titles and whatnot. I mean, really just, it was fascinating to begin with, but over the decades, as I've spent time listening to Braxton's music, what I've really come to appreciate is the sense that what his music presents is more than just sound. It's a notion of society. It's a vision of community. It's a utopian kind of idea of the way that we can all coexist with, a set of rules that binds us together, but with mutual respect and with a whole lot of liberty to express ourselves in our individual ways. And, if everybody sort of agrees to the rules of this society, what we get is this amazingly sort of euphonious sense of how we can all coexist. And the musicians that I'm here with today, I mean, I got to tell you, I'm a little bit overwhelmed because they're all experienced in one way or another with exactly what the impact of playing and interacting with and living with Braxton's music is. Braxton is himself among the most significant artists that this country has ever produced. And with me are musicians who, I mean, everybody here is a sort of polysyllabic, omnidirectional artist, a composer, an improviser, a band leader, an educator, a thinker and a teacher. I'm really, excited and overwhelmed to be here with these four artists today. Ingrid Loubrock is originally from Germany, a saxophonist who moved to Brooklyn in the year 2009. She's performed in a couple of Anthony's Trillium operas and in other ensembles besides. She's led workshops for the Tri-Centric Foundation. She is involved very much in a vision of uniting composition and improvisation that stems from the example that Braxton has given us. And that's really, really evident in Run Right Out and Buy This, actually. Her 2018 album, Contemporary Chaos Practices, which was a couple of really, really juicy, ambitious orchestral pieces. I had the very real privilege of writing the liner notes for that, so I lived with that music for a long time, and it's just really overwhelming. So hello, Ingrid, and thanks for joining us.
Hello.
I should preface this by saying I'm going to do a lot of talking right now, and then we're going to get a lot of talk from our panelists later on after some more video. Corey Smythe is a pianist, a composer, a member of the International Contemporary Ensemble. Corey won a Grammy in 2015 for his work with Hilary Hahn, but you might also know him for his work with Taishan Sori, or indeed for his work with Ingrid Loubrock in a number of different formats, including trios and an orchestral piece that is going to be the next big piece down the line. So I'm excited to hear more about that myself. In addition, Corey has been responsible for some very exciting recordings of his own, including a brand new record, Accelerate Every Voice, that just came out, a sort of small choral ensemble with piano that's really just kind of a mind-bending 21st century vision of vocal consort music. Again, I'm not doing it justice, sort of speaking off the cuff, but Corey is going to tell us later on how this particular project actually stemmed from his experience of Anthony Braxton's music. So we'll get a real sense of how Braxton has empowered and engaged people to create new work. So thank you, and hello, Corey.
Hello, thank you.
Josh Modney is a violinist with the International Contemporary Ensemble. He is the one panelist here who has not interacted with Anthony Braxton directly, but I'm going to add the word yet because it's inevitable. Josh has also worked with Wet Ink Ensemble. He has performed music of Anthony Braxton with both of these ensembles. And indeed, when he issued his most recent recording, the very, very ambitious triple CD set Engage in August of 2018. There's a piece of Anthony Braxton's on that, composition number 222. But beyond that, and beyond having a program that literally extends from Bach to Braxton, which is as it should be, this is an album that includes some of Josh's own compositions. And later on, he's going to be explaining to us how his own compositions for unaccompanied violin were in some way, in a very direct way, inspired by the solo alto saxophone music that Anthony Braxton made at the very beginning of his career, which has resounded among so many players and so many artists and creators for decades. So thank you, Josh.
Thank you. Hello.
Hello. And finally, we have Tamika Reed, the brilliantly versatile and in-demand cellist who was born outside of the Washington, D.C. area, but settled in Chicago in the year 2000. Chicago is a very important city for creative music. It was the birthplace of Braxton. It was the birthplace of the AACM. So again, a hotbed of creative music for so many decades. And Tamika has been very much at the center of so much that's happening in that city in recent decades, whether you talk about her work, her close work with the flutist and composer Nicole Mitchell, various projects with Mike Reed. More recently, she's been working very closely with Roscoe Mitchell, and she has been in the latest iterations of the fabled, iconic Art Ensemble of Chicago, the flagship band, if you will, of the AACM. So again, Tamika has been a part of history in various respects, and since 2015, she's been leading a quartet of her own. This is kind of cool because later in this program, very soon you're going to be hearing a trio called Thumbscrew, and two members of that band, Mary Halverson on guitar and the percussionist Toma Fujiwara, are both in the quartet that Tamika leads on her most recent album, Old New, which is, without exaggeration, one of the best records that came out last year. And finally, certainly not least, Dr. Reed in fall of 2019 had a teaching appointment as the Darius Mio Chair for Composition at Mills College in Oakland, which is in fact a place, an institution where Braxton had previously taught. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Reed. This is really, really exciting to have all of you here. And in my hyper caffeinated state, I'm really, really psyched to get a chance to speak to all of you about your individual projects, but also about how interacting with Braxton as a figure, as an example, as a composer, as a leader, has had a direct impact on the work that you've done, how he might have inspired you, whether personally or simply by example. I say simply, and there's nothing simple about any of this, really. So we are going to be speaking with our panelists. I'm addressing you, the audience, now. We'll be speaking with all of our panelists later on in the program. But right now, what's up next is a behind the scenes glimpse of the workings of the Tri-Centric Foundation, which was established in 1994 after Braxton won his MacArthur grant. It was reorganized in 2010 and has become sort of the hub for preserving and promoting Braxton's music. And I'm going to take a moment to read here, so excuse me if my eyes wander. The Tri-Centric Foundation is a not-for-profit organization which supports the work and legacy of living composer Anthony Braxton and the surrounding community of musicians. Remember that word community because it's key. So Tri-Centric has been behind many projects, recordings, and performances of Braxton himself, and it runs the new Braxton House record label, but it has also been key to the functioning of a lot of other artists, and it has made a mission of making available Braxton's archive to the widest community possible, including artists like the Ensemble, the International Contemporary Ensemble. So the Tri-Centric Foundation is fundamental to why we're here tonight, and it's fundamental to the next segment in our programming.
Orchestra enters here.
So that's that chord.
Okay. And so then what happens in M2?
Then they play the second part of the notated music.
This is almost all ready to go.
Yeah.
Like I have the score scanned, cleaned up, all the parts scanned, cleaned up. So this could be given to orchestra.
I mean, we can do this. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
This.
How do
I feel very good about this piece.
But then how about for these section BBs? Where does that happen within the piece?
So some of them are marked, but let's see. Can we see all the different sections we have?
Yeah.
Because they're playing it. You have the chamber orchestra, and you have the three solo clarinets, high, above, and in the middle. Mm-hmm. And then it comes to the M section, and they go into a unison, and then a long chord, and then they go back into M2. And that's the only time they play synchronous. The other times they're playing their solo music separate from the orchestra.
Okay, and they choose what material to play throughout the piece.
Yes.
From section BB.
Yes.
So all this material is constructed by the instrumentalist within the course of the whole piece.
Yes.
My question was whether these were made at the time or whether these were made after the fact, after you had recorded the pieces as like analysis.
No, this was before.
This was before the recording.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not sure if all of this has been recorded. I don't think this has been recorded.
And so then Diamond Clef.
Yes.
When was the first time you used Diamond Clef?
I don't know.
It would have been in early '68 or
Yes.
60. Okay.
I was building up a vocabulary and a symbology.
And with this as a solo concept with multiple staves, these are possibilities to trace.
Including sing one and play one. Have some fun with it.
Ah, okay.
I haven't seen this since 1971.
That was a really, really cool peek into the Tri-Centric archives. And I have to admit, it's kind of a little fantasy to sort of go up there and kick around and open boxes and just see what's in storage up there. That should give you also a taste of why the Tri-Centric Foundation is of such paramount importance, not only for supporting Braxton the performer, but for creating, facilitating, cleaning up things that are in the archives and making the music available to other artists to use. And the Tri-Centric Foundation archive was fundamental to the project that we're about to hear about next, which is a new album called The Anthony Braxton Project, which was released just last Friday by the trio Thumbscrew. This is guitarist Mary Halverson, who has been involved in any number of Anthony Braxton projects, from large ensembles to very small groups. Toma Fujiwara, the percussionist, has been involved in at least one Braxton project that I know of, which was an amazingly vital trio that involved the two of them plus another drummer, Tom Rainey. And then, Mike Formanek, the bassist, I'm caught with my pants down. I am not literally. I do not recall any instance in which Mike has played with Anthony. I hope that someone will correct me if in fact he has, but definitely this trio has created an identity and a language of its own. And now it has gone into the Tri-Centric Foundation archives and found previously unrecorded pieces, compositions from Braxton's back catalog, and recorded them for the first time. The album is terrific. And up next to tell you all about the recording process is the three members of Thumbscrew with Tri-Centric Foundation Executive Director Kyoko Kitamura.
Most of the compositions on this album have never been recorded, so you didn't have Anthony's performance as a reference point. And so I wanted to ask you how you approach these works, and maybe we can start with Mary, who has worked extensively with Anthony.
So this was a lot of deciphering work for us, and we tried to be as thorough as possible. So when we visited the archives, we had access to all of the scores, but we also had performance, we also had the notes from the composition notes, I should say. So basically what we did was we looked at which compositions we thought could work for this group, not only based on the instrumentation, because I don't think there was anything that was for guitar, bass, and drums, but whether there might have been something for open instrumentation, or whether there would have been a small group piece that we could easily adapt. And then also looking at the composition notes, we tried to figure out as best we could what Anthony's intention was, how he wanted the piece to come across, whether that was a specific conceptual thing or whether it was a tempo, or some of them would say, for extended open improvisation. And then we tried to just piece it together the best we could.
So let me keep on this topic, ask you about composition number 35 and how that score was presented to you, and then what kind of discussions followed in the ensemble. So Mary.
So, okay, that one was really tricky because it was basically what we had was a bunch of segments on cardboard, different sections, which weren't in any particular order. It was almost like a little puzzle pieces with written notation. So with that, we were trying to really piece together with the notes, whether they were supposed to be in a particular order, what the concept was. And those sections in the composition notes, it talked about sections A, B, and C, but those weren't labeled on the pieces of cardboard that we had. So it was a lot of deciphering to try to figure out how we could arrange it in a way that was true to what Anthony intended, but at the same time, how we could make a musical statement with the three of us that made sense and maybe would present a unique aspect of it. So that one was really interesting. I feel like that might have been the one that we spent the most time trying to decipher and analyze and think about what worked for this instrumentation in this band.
One of the striking sounds of this recording is the vibraphone. And going on what Mary said, that you had to sort of adapt the instruments to each compositions. So Toma, can you tell me how you chose which instruments to play on which compositions?
Yeah, I actually didn't. No, I had a choice, but I tell this story that we were all meeting at the Tri-Centric offices in New Haven to look over all of the scores and decide what we wanted to play. and the three of us were coming from 3 different places, and my train was delayed. So I arrived about an hour late, and Mary and Michael had already begun looking through the compositions and choosing some that they, thought might work well. And as they caught me up, they had a lot of pieces that had 3 melody lines, and they said, we thought you could play vibraphone on these pieces. And the vibraphone is an instrument that I've always loved, that I've played from time to time, but haven't had quite this opportunity to really jump into specific compositions for a specific recording, with a very specific goal in mind. And so and I wonder if I had been there on time, if I would have maybe vetoed some of those compositions, just feeling, shy about jumping back into playing the vibes. But I felt like, well, I'm already an hour late. I don't want to kind of ruin the work that they've done. And I'm really, really happy that it worked out that way, because it was a great opportunity for me to jump back into playing the vibes. And City of Asylum, where we did our residency, provided me with a beautiful instrument which I could practice every day, which was the first time that I could really do that since high school. Just be with the instrument every day, be with the compositions every day. And so it was basically the decision for which pieces I would play on vibraphone. Those were made just by compositions that had 3 melody lines. That was kind of the guiding factor for that. And then in terms of some of the improvisations, I had the vibraphone and the drums set up in the same room, so I could kind of go back and forth. So then it was just kind of, being in the moment, as we all are as improvisers, and kind of making musical decisions in the moment of which instrument I wanted to play, and in terms of improvisation.
Some of the compositions, some were very well marked. There was composition number 68, for example, had the arco and the pitch, so it was very marked for the bass. But some of them, for example, composition number 157, how did you, Toma, come up with the drums for that?
So that was fun because, sorry, I'm going through my music here, and well, the picture for it is this like very energetic drawing of people playing basketball. And anyone that knows me knows that I love basketball, and so just from the picture alone, I was drawn to that piece.
Is that the graphic title?
Yeah. And then so that was really inspiring. But in terms of the notated music, I just was looking at the part that Mary was going to play and the part that Michael was going to play, and kind of created a composite of the two, in terms of seeing where they lined up, where they didn't line up, and kind of making decisions as to parts that I was going to play with one or both of them, or play against. So it was kind of, I kind of practiced it deliberately in terms of being able to have 1 or 2 limbs play Michael's part, and 1 or 2 limbs be able to play Mary's part, and switch them, so that I had some flexibility in the moment to kind of react and shape how I felt sounded right in the moment.
For composition number 79, so this is a question for Michael, same thing. How did you approach this, and your bass part, for example?
Well, I guess it started just going through, like I did with several of the pieces, just sort of extracting the parts and looking at them in concert, because a lot of them were transposed parts. So just kind of going back and looking at them and how they all related to each other, and then going to the notes, which a lot of the notational things doing with notation we did on our own, but looking at the composition notes, a lot of that was done more during our residency. And so when we started reading through it, it all made perfect sense to me that this was Anthony's take on Kansas City jazz, early jazz swing music of the territories in the 1930s and all that, but definitely with his perspective and his point of view. And he said there's so many great things in the notes, in the composition notes about it, that made me think, that it really, the most important thing in that was to have the feeling of that, and just to have the feeling of that communal, music making sort of process, and the feel and the swing, even though we could do things could still be very abstracted, and so it was just, that was just kind of the starting place. And then my part, I mean, I think one of his first notes was that where he had written this, and for Muhal to play piano, to play a walking bass line on piano, and that would be sort of a constant, or it would come back at various points and stuff. So we just kind of started with that, and then my part ended up evolving because there was it was a trombone, bass clarinet, and an alto part originally. So I wanted to grab some of the notes of when there was counterpoint or where there were harmony parts. So I kind of combined a more functional part with that, and that's just kind of how it evolved. It was just, and trying different things, but sort of using that, and then trying to use the nature, the sort of riff nature of some of the great things that he included in there, which I think were really meant to play with and to develop.
And how do you think that the work you did for this album might affect you in the future as both composer and performer? We can stay with Michael.
Oh, I mean, it's just so vast. I mean, there's so much there that I remember leaving really inspired from having that, the experience of recording it, and then again diving back in and listening for the mix and getting the recording together, and then again now just kind of reviewing and hearing the recording. Like there's so many different facets that I would like to dive further into, and I still feel like, for me at least, because again I mean I'll say it now, I have the least experience with Anthony playing. I played one concert many years ago. I've listened to lots of music, so I don't have as much of that experience. So for me, it's I'm still just exploring a lot of the different worlds through this, and yeah, I think it has a huge effect, and I'd like to have that be represented more over time.
Anybody that knows me knows that Anthony is basically the reason why I'm a musician, and his music has always been completely formative and fundamental, and has inspired everything I've done. That being said, a lot of these compositions were new to me. So I think, and it's been several years since I've played Anthony's music regularly. So for me, this was almost a renewal of inspiration, and just being reminded of just how wide his approach is. All of these compositions, he took such different approaches, and there's just so much there to draw from and be inspired from. And I think with Thumbscrew, I think it really did push us into some different improvisational spaces. And that feels really exciting, especially with this trio, because we played so much already. And I do feel like that doing this record and dealing with Anthony's music pushed us to a new place as a band.
So the compositions keep opening new doors for you.
Exactly.
And Toma?
Yeah, I mean, the word that Mary used that I always think of first and foremost with Anthony is inspiration. Every time I get a chance to even be around him, whether it's getting to play with him, but getting to have a conversation with him, or hear him speak, or hear his recordings, it's such an inspiring feeling that comes over me, beyond just, oh, I want to go practice, or I want to write music, but just in as broad a sense as that feeling of inspiration. And so that was I felt very free to really explore the possibilities with these compositions. And I think that if anything, that's the main thing that I take from this music into my own music, just his influence in that way, to be inspired, to try things, to not we always are self-editing what we do and what we say and what we put out there, and he just seems to be constantly putting himself out there and taking risks and taking chances and saying what if and let's try and all these things. And so those you know, to your question about how that's influenced my compositions and my compositional process, I would say that's the biggest influence. Is just, you know, keep doing it and keep trying and keep putting it out there and you know, keep searching. And that's extremely inspiring to me.
Would you have any words for musicians who may be thinking about performing a Braxton composition, perhaps for the very first time?
Yeah, you know, do it. Just do it. Experience it. Try to look at it from every possible perspective you can. Try to understand what it is that he was specifically saying, and then try to see what you draw from it on your own. See what you can learn about yourself through experiencing that music. Definitely do it.
Thank you. Toma?
Definitely, as Michael said, definitely do it. Definitely go for it. Take a lot of chances. You know, be obviously respectful and you know, aware of the information and where it's coming from, but don't have that hold you back from taking chances, from quote unquote making mistakes, from, you know, finding your own personal path through it. You know, take those chances and take those risks as you explore the material.
Thank you. And Mary?
I think, you know, a lot of people will ask me where to start with Anthony, and I think a lot of people are intimidated by his music because they think that it's difficult or they're not going to understand. And knowing Anthony, he would want you to just dive in and try it, and he always emphasizes that there's no mistakes or that mistakes are good things. So I think just kind of starting anywhere and diving in and not worrying too much about whether you're approaching it in the right or the wrong way. And then as you get into it, I think the best thing you can do is listen. So listen to his recordings. Tri-Centric is a great resource. I mean, just the fact that we were able to go to the archive and get all this information. There's so many recordings available. So I would say just not being intimidated, dive in, and then as you go along, you know, supplement it with listening and reading some of the notes.
Thank you. And all the music we talked about, it is on the Anthony Braxton project, which just came out. And yes, this is so informative. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
It's amazing. I've done so much thinking about how, as a musician, you would go about approaching Anthony Braxton's music. And I just got the answer a moment ago from Mike Formanek. Just do it. I mean, you can put that on a T-shirt, I think. And Tomas said something really important too, which is be respectful of the material, understand what's there, but then go your own way. And that's actually something that sort of builds on what James Fay said just a few weeks ago, maybe not even that long ago, in a brilliant sort of illustrated lecture that he did for the International Contemporary Ensemble in conjunction with the New School at Ensemble Evolution. That video, in fact, is on Vimeo right now, and I highly recommend it. It was just really illuminating in terms of learning both the roots of Braxton's language and how it has expanded from 12 distinct types of language music into 12 archetypes, and the way that things sort of expand and contract in his body of music. I am already speaking too much, but one thing we should have taken away from the Thumbscrew video is just how important the Tri-Centric archive is in terms of making materials available. And again, to quote from a page that was used as a fundraiser last fall, the archive includes 10,000 to 20,000 pieces of print material in the form of over 400 scores and parts, various writings, cassettes, videos, and ephemera. And the reason for this fundraiser, it wasn't just to to sort of fill the coffers, it was because the Tri-Centric Foundation is getting ready to reprint Braxton's Triaxiom writings, which is, again, not just a view into his compositional process, but really into his whole larger philosophy of what music and creativity are and what they mean to the individuals. Also, having these materials available means that ensembles like the International Contemporary Ensemble, Wedding, Ensemble Moderne, whomever, can access these parts and can sort of begin to expand the reach of the Braxton canon beyond Braxton's own performers and Braxton's own band into sort of a larger world. And that's what we really want to get at right here. Ingrid, you've written for the, once again, Ingrid Loubrock, saxophonist, composer, band leader, et cetera, et cetera. You have written for the Tri-Centric Orchestra as well as for orchestras elsewhere. You've recorded orchestral pieces, and you're doing another orchestral project right now that in fact involves Corey and Josh. You said to me in an email prefacing this that you credited Braxton with stretching the limits of what's possible and available to a musician. So I wonder if you can just address what it was about Braxton's work that inspired you to go on and do these big orchestral pieces, these ambitious projects.
I think, I mean, I've been playing with Anthony since 2011. And I think, like, through conversations with him, what always came up is that if you have a dream of like of anything musically, just do it. Similarly to the T-shirt you want to put. Like, it's basically.
We might get sued if we put that on a T-shirt. Honestly.
I mean, his approach is he has composed so much music that has never been played, you know, like that particular time with the Tri-Centric Orchestra played my composition. They also premiered a piece of his that was written maybe in the 60s, you know, that was an orchestra piece which he has never even heard performed. And I'm sure there's many stacks of pieces that are, you know, dense orchestral pieces that have not been played. So there's always been the approach that the passion is very important, and just the action, you know, that you really just you put your you do what you want to do, you know. So if you've been dreaming of writing, like me as a jazz musician or somebody who came from a jazz and improvised background, I grew up listening to classical music, so in a way that I always wanted to play around with that much sound and have that much sound at my disposal. Right. But mentally I would have just never allowed myself to do it, you know. So there was a certain unblocking that took part through meeting Anthony, I think. You know, he just took all of that away, just like, go for it, do it, you know, go with the flow of inspiration, you know. Yeah.
Just do it. I'm going to get so sued for that. But you bring up a really interesting and fruitful tension that's been a part of Braxton's music from the very beginning, sort of inadvertently, and something that he's had to fight with for decades, which is the fact that, you know, early on for the jazz crowd, he was too cerebral, too European, too much into the classical stuff. I mean, he developed his solo alto music in large part because he was inspired by the piano music of Arnold Schoenberg, but didn't view himself to be a proficient enough pianist to pursue that dream. And so he looked for an alternate way. But there again, for the classical crowd, it was almost the opposite. He was too jazz. There was too much improvisation, too much looseness, too much left to chance. And so this is something that I think is actually being addressed in groups like the International Contemporary Ensemble taking up Braxton's music, but also, as you just said, by someone who identifies as being a jazz musician or from the jazz world, feeling free to simply just write an orchestral piece if that's what you're feeling. So that definitely feels like an extension, turning something that Braxton fought with for decades into a positive, into an anything goes kind of capacity.
Well, I think there's a very healthy scene in New York now that is basically operating from several strings of streams of musicians that have really checked out other types of music. And Anthony is for sure somebody who studied all music, right? Like all music, all mysticism, all religion, all philosophies. And I think now there is a much healthier respect for boundary genre crossing and boundary crossing music. You do not have to label it quite as much. The musicians are fantastic and will take material seriously. There's less of a oh, if it's this, I won't touch it. And there's also less musicians are less naive about the other genres that exist, I think.
Sure. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Musicians themselves are much more learned. Tamika, I'm curious about sort of the one-on-one process. You've played in a couple of the operas now, and I'm thinking in terms of what Mary was just saying a moment ago, and what others alluded to about the fact that from the outside, the music can seem very esoteric and kind of forbidding. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit first about literally the experience of working with Anthony. What is that like? How does he communicate with the people who are performing in his ensembles?
I feel like working with Braxton is very challenging in a good way. It does push your boundaries so that you really grow as far as learning how to work within the framework that he's providing. Doing the two operas, let me see. It was just a very different experience because I've played in orchestras, but of course everything's always printed out. But when you're having this element of including the improvisation in there, that's just a very unique and inspiring concept. It's something I had never had experience with. And it definitely keeps you engaged. That was something that I feel like I didn't enjoy about playing in regular orchestras so much, is that, you're always reading the same notes or the same parts, but you really had to kind of like, it's going to be so different every time because of the element of improvisation.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so I think just to latch into what has been said, it's just inspiring just to see what possibilities are. You may not know what you can do or what is even possible. You may not have envisioned it, but it's just watching him and being around him and seeing all the different possibilities that he's tried. It makes you think like, well, how could I try that? Or how could I incorporate that into something that I do? And it won't be the same, but it just expands your own concept of composition.
Are there specific things that you can point to in your own output or your own canon of works where you feel like there's some connection, some direct connection to something that you experienced in Braxton's music?
Well, I would say like on my latest record, the tune I wrote, Peripatetic, was definitely influenced by Braxton, or it just made me, when I was writing it, it made me feel like some moment I had experienced musically with him. Mm-hmm. Just having these different sections, and just in my own way, it was kind of like a homage to him.
Sure. Corey, you also worked on one of the operas, at least one of the operas, correct me. Was there more than one? I know you were on Trillium E.
Just the one, sadly, for me, yeah.
And you mentioned in passing, we did a little bit of homework and preparation. We're not just ad-libbing everything here. And you mentioned that you actually thought there was a portion in Trillium E that may have subconsciously or unconsciously influenced what you've just done on your newest album, Accelerate Every Voice. And I wonder if you could sort of unpack that story a little bit and talk about how that influence expressed itself.
Yeah, well, I think to start out with, Braxton's influence is so immense that it's kind of maybe always operating a little bit behind the scenes, even when you're not so consciously aware of it. And I had a moment of maybe recognizing that in the last few days as I was trying to prepare for contributing some possible minute of value to this discussion, and reviewing Braxton's music and the things that I've played. And so, yeah, one thing that I played was on this opera, Trillion E. And I was listening to it, and I'd sort of forgotten that there's this moment towards the end of Act 4 where I've got it up here. He describes it in the scene. The characters are in this kind of procession on their way to this mysterious set of ruins, and the music there starts to bring forth this what Braxton calls a kind of glee club fraternity music, a kind of Halls of Ivy, Blue Blood, Harvard/Yale 1920s music. And this music will emerge in this other kind of cloud of interesting abstract texture in a kind of what Braxton calls double music state. And I was like, oh yeah, I think that's in a way a version of that's describing in a way what I just tried to do on this last project, which was sort of calling on this example of the Whiff and Poof song, which is from that exact era that Braxton's talking about, and this Blue Blood college glee club music, and to enfold it in this kind of double state. So there you go. I inadvertently stole that from Braxton and this experience that I had 10 years ago.
You talk a little bit on the Bandcamp page for your Tri-Centric recording of Composition 30 about working on that piece with Braxton and how he explained to you that you had a lot more options than you might have thought you had. That you were daunted at first, but that he told you that a lot of opportunity was open. Could you describe that process a little bit?
My memory of that is a little clouded by just all the anxiety I had around preparing that piece, but and it was
you'd
about,
never know to listen. You'd never know to listen.
It was about a decade ago, and I had gotten the score, and it's like 100 pages of music, and without any kind of repetition. It's really abstract and kind of pointillistic all over the piano, and so I dutifully tried to prepare it and practice, to play it from page 1 to page 100 like I would normally do, and and I arrived at the gig, and I hadn't really had an opportunity to work on it with him, so it was in just a few moments before the performance where, as I recall anyway, he instructed me that, oh no, actually you're not meant to play it from front to back in that way. You should scramble it up and sometimes play things backwards and then forwards, and so I don't know that I think at the time I did sort of experience that as simultaneously even more daunting, but also like a relief. Like, oh, this isn't about presenting this hopefully perfect thing that I tried to master at home, but it's about contending with these real-time decisions and doing my best with it. And the music that emerges from that is the music that he wants to hear.
Right, exactly. And that also, I mean, not to step on your line, but that also to me connects to that whole idea of here's a rule book, here's a way that you can function, but within this you're given more or less a lot of autonomy to express yourself and to be yourself within the rules that he's established. And that to me again seems to reflect this very utopian sort of aspirational vision of how music can serve as a microcosm of a harmonious society, as hard as we may have a time imagining that at this particular moment in human history, that's what Braxton has always, in a sense, been reaching toward, is giving you the key to be yourself while still being completely faithful to what he's put in front of you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just was pontificating just a little bit there. Josh, so as I said before, you're the only one of the musicians gathered here today who has not worked directly with Braxton, but I would emphasize that has to come with a yet attached, because it just seems sort of inevitable given what you've done and where you've been and the trajectory that you're headed. You did include Composition 222 on your very, very expansive and ambitious solo album, and I wonder why that was.
Well, when I was setting out to make my solo album, Engage, I knew I wanted to include pieces that were written for me and that were long-term collaborations, and also pieces that I wrote and pieces that just spoke to me and were like really important voices in my development as a musician. And one of those voices is Braxton.
It was fascinating to me to hear or to read rather that you indicated that your own pieces on that record were sort of a continuum of Braxton's work as well. Because when I think of the violin, I mean, unaccompanied violin is a pretty established thing dating back to Bach and Isai and Paganini. There's a real repertory there. But you indicated that you were actually sort of taking your lead more from single line improvisers like Braxton, like Evan Parker, or closer to your own milieu to Peter Evans and Nate Woolley, sort of deriving your violinistic approach from the single line unaccompanied approaches that they had invented. Why was that?
Yeah, first of all, I feel like as a classically trained violinist, Bach is always there somehow. The unaccompanied, not as on partitas. And looking back at those pieces, I think the violin is essentially designed to be a melodic instrument. And here Bach has written 4-part harmony for the violin. And so that concept of pushing the limit of the violin is kind of baked into a lot of classical repertoire that followed Bach. But then as far as my own playing and the kind of music that I like to make, I think the artists that I first was attracted to were, you mentioned these trumpeters, whom I really admire, Peter Evans and Nate Woolley, and both of them have taken their own distinctive approach to the trumpet. Like you couldn't confuse the two of them for each other. Like incredibly distinct voices.
Very much.
But I feel like both of them are examples of artists who, in addition to all their ensemble work, when they're playing as a soloist, they can take their instrument as this like tiny universe and just go into that universe deeper and deeper. And they, along with Braxton and Evan Parker and many other wonderful wind players, more on like creative music improvisation scene, at least identified as such, have gone into their instruments and found these pockets of idiosyncratic expressive material that they can switch between rapidly. And then later I discovered, for alto, Braxton's 1969 album, which is all alto saxophone music, and thought, like, wow, this is like a progenitor to these works by my contemporaries that I'm so enthusiastic about. So I was hoping to find a bit of that approach in the violin.
Fantastic. I'm curious about one thing, and we're starting to get cues of questions from the outside world, which is fabulous because it's good to know that you are all out there. Thank you for tuning in. I'm just kind of curious about the whole notion of the erasure of sort of genre. It's a poisonous word, but I'm thinking in terms of the way that through the work of musicians like everybody assembled here and groups like the International Contemporary Ensemble, Wet Ink, Dal Niente, and so forth, the idea that boundaries are being torn down and that Braxton is gaining access to a world and its listeners that might have been denied before, and what impact that has on the musical world itself. I realize that that's kind of vague, but I'm also thinking very much in terms of how the classical music world has for a very long time been sort of typified as a gated community that needs to let more of the world in. So I just wonder if you have thoughts on how Braxton's music moving into a broader world might impact that world.
I could speak to this a bit as a classical performer.
Yes, please.
As a classically trained violinist, improvisation is not a big part of that tradition. But it's something I found myself really attracted to. And I found that through playing Braxton's music, that his systems and his music themselves are like a great improvisation teacher. And the fact that you can take his pieces, and if you're not so comfortable improvising, you don't have to. You can play the ink. But if you're a very accomplished improviser, you can take it to all sorts of different places and everything in between. And so I found Braxton's music to be extremely inviting as someone without training in improvisation to start getting my feet wet and experiencing that side of expressivity.
Fantastic. Anyone?
Well, his music, like, I mean, I can only say, like, all the large groups that I've ever listened to or was part of any large Braxton ensemble often consists of classical musicians, of jazz musicians, of improvisers, you know, some people who can read anything, some people who are less proficient readers, but fantastic improvisers, you know. And if you then, and because of that, like, there is a certain, like, rhythmic element that you cannot play, you will not have if you have musicians who have been trained the same way play the music. For example, like if you take the Ghost Trance accelerator species, Ghost Trance music, which has a lot of complex subdivisions, people will play these very, very differently, but they will still hang together because Anthony has such a strong phrasing and strong sense of timing himself. But they're like frayed at the edges, and it's like a beautiful, beautiful, natural, and like inimitable sound that I associate with his music, for example. And it's not really got to do with this music itself being a particular genre, but with the musicians he invites, you know, the trust he puts into the musicians. And Ghost Trance music has these portals where you have a chance to escape, to improvise, to weave in other compositions, to color it. Sometimes it's even written with color, right? So you can change the color of how you play this particular phrase, you know. So it's not really that it tries to fit into a certain genre, but it's like truly genre bending, and as it's very, very inviting of everybody's experience and color and uniqueness, which is really special.
Absolutely. Tamika, I see you nodding in assent to that. Is there something that you would add to echo that?
No, I just think she said that really eloquently. I agree. I do feel like the music wouldn't be performed. Well, it's not about performing, I guess, the music perfectly. I think that's what I also enjoy about it. It's about the journey of how the music expands and, you know, contracts, does all those different things. And I do agree with Josh too. I've used Braxton's language musics to work with beginning improvisers a bunch, and I feel like it is a great way to get those who are not comfortable improvising. It's like a really great entryway into that world. Because it's using techniques that they are familiar with, and it's like you have something to kind of like latch onto when you're trying to navigate and figure out where you want to go. But yeah, I do feel it's great that he does have such a wide array of performers. So classical people, jazz people, just what Ingrid said. It makes for a really unique experience and brings everyone up, you know. Go ahead.
Down to even the singers in the opera, right? Like in Julie and Me, it was not
all opera singers.
Opera singers, you know.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
One thing I would add to that is Ingrid just mentioned Ghost Trance music, and Tamika just mentioned language musics. The terminology that surrounds Braxton's canon can be very, very forbidding to people who would like to be friendly experiencers but haven't found their way in. To that, I would just cite issue number 16 of the music journal Sound American was a brilliant overview of Braxton's work that included an explication of what language musics are, a brilliant essay by Erica Dicker of the various types of Ghost Trance music. It's free, it's online. I cannot recommend it highly enough. And after you've digested that, be sure to read this, Forces in Motion by Graham Locke. because it's not only a great book about Anthony Braxton, it's one of the best books anybody has ever written about music ever. There's a new edition. Go get it now. Everybody who is on the screen now is about to go hop over into a Zoom conference and take questions directly from those of you assembled here. You've probably by now seen instructions on how to get there. So I would just say, again, on behalf of everybody, first off, thank you, Ingrid, Corey, Josh, and Tamika for letting me grill you this afternoon. This has been an honor, a privilege, and a pleasure. Also, thank you, Ross and International Contemporary Ensemble and the Tri-Centric Foundation for letting me go off at length about my 35-year passionate love for Anthony Braxton. And up next is a performance that actually involves Josh Modney plus Izzy Gleicher and Ryan Muncie, the International Contemporary Ensemble, playing 3 different works by Anthony Braxton all at once. It's a collage performance of compositions 263, 192, and 144, recently recorded at the Ice House in Brooklyn.
Thank you all so much for joining this presentation in partnership with the New York Public Library and the Tri-Centric Foundation. My name is Ross Carr. I'm the co-artistic director of the International Contemporary Ensemble and a percussionist for the group. I would be delighted if you would all join us in a Zoom conference call to chat with the artists and to continue the conversation. You can meet us there with the information up there in your screens. Go to the Zoom application and join the meeting with the ID 824-6241-1398. And then when prompted, you may enter the password 460461, and my colleagues will let you in there. I'll be joining there soon. I'm going to just leave this link up here for a little while so that you can jot it down. I've noticed that there's a nice mnemonic in that password to use. There's 460, you can add 1, 461. Really remarkable. A special thank you to Evan Leslie of the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts for hosting these hybrid concerts and explorations and conversations over the last 4 years together. We've done a lot of work in the last season, and we look forward to the next season as we do more of these, make more of this type of information available to everybody on our website and online in the form of streams. To find out more about the International Contemporary Ensemble, you can go to our website. That's iceorg.org. And the websites of the New York Public Library and the Tri-Centric Foundation are also incredible resources. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to Steve Smythe for moderating. Thank you to Thumbscrew, and especially to the Tri-Centric Foundation, Kyoko Kitamura, who we will hopefully see soon in the Zoom call. If not, then we'll look forward to having future chats down the road. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and we'll see you soon.